Hello, and welcome to another edition of Here We Are. I'm your host, T.R. Mugabe. Welcome to the show. Having a terminal illness can have a tremendous effect on a person's life. The altering or limitations placed on a person's lifestyle who suffers from a grave illness can take not only a physical toll, but a psychological one as well. Now, the pain and suffering caused by terminal illness is not experienced solely by the person with the ailment. The family suffers as well. In this segment, we're going to talk with Geneva Bell. She is the author of the book called My Rose. Now, the rose Geneva is referring to in her book is her son Jeffrey, who died of AIDS back in 1992. My Rose is Geneva's story of how she dealt with her son's illness and his sexual orientation. Now, while this book is under 100 pages, it contains a lot of information. Thank you so much, Geneva, for coming to the program. We're so glad to have you.
Thank you for inviting me.
The name of the book is My Rose, and as I said in my opening, it deals with how you dealt with your son who had an incurable disease and the different manifestations of it. There's so many people who could relate to your story. Why did you decide to write this, and what makes your story so unique?
Well, I decided to write this book really, I guess it really wasn't my decision to write it. I've always journaled. And I guess as I was going through this, Reverend Wright, my pastor at Trinity United Church of Christ, was watching me, I guess, as I went through this. And he asked me to talk about it at a Deacon's retreat. We have all the ministries at Trinity have a one-day retreat during the year. And he asked me to talk to the deacons about it, what I had gone through and how I felt about what had happened during this time. And at first I didn't want to do it because I knew it was such an emotional issue with me. And I had not talked about this. This was a year after Jeffrey had passed away. And I had it was just over and done with, and I had the only person that knew how I felt was me in that journal that I wrote in every night. So I told him that I was just I didn't want to do it because I didn't want to cry like that in public. And he said, that's why God gave you tears, so tell him what happened. So I did. About a couple of weeks after that, I wrote him a letter. I communicate with him mostly by mail. I very rarely, as a matter of fact, I don't think I've been in his office to talk to him face to face since Jeffrey died. So I wrote him a letter, and I thanked him for asking me to do that because it did relieve some of the stuff, whatever it was inside of me. And I said, one of these days I'm going to write a book about this and just let people know what went on. So he wrote me back, and he said, not one of these days, do it now. And that started this book. So the book was his vision.
Oh, the book was he gave to you. Let's mention a couple of things, or bring out a couple of things you talked about. This book is a combination of the journal writings that you did. Did you just start writing the journal during this illness, or had you always kept a journal?
I kept a journal all of my life.
What has been the importance of keeping a journal for you?
I think maybe because I'm a sort of a person that internalizes all of my feelings. You know, I'll keep them inside of me, and then I won't sleep at night, or I'll worry about whatever is going on during that day. So I found out that writing it down, everything that happened that day before I go to sleep, it helps me to sleep better and helps me to get it out of my system.
So you did this way before this happened. Let's talk about Jeffrey. What type of person was he?
Well, Jeffrey was, in preschool, Jeffrey was a little preschooler that was in charge of opening and closing the doors on the bus to let the kids in and out. He had a bus driver by the name of Mr. Dice, and he'd pick up Jeffrey first. He was 3 and 4 years old, and Jeffrey would be in charge of opening the door, picking up the kids, and Jeffrey remembered where every child lived, where they got off. Then in grade school, he was captain of the patrol boys in the school right across the street, and I could look out and see he'd be so proud with his belt on. High school and college, he was drum majors in the high school and college bands. He went to the service for 3 years. He served in the Army for 3 years, and he was headed the administrative office on the base, and he really joined the Army to travel. He stayed in one spot for 3 years, so he was so good at what he did, so they kept him there. And he got his MBA while he was in the Army, the 3 years that he served. And when he got out of the Army, he was employed. When he died, he was employed by the Chicago Police Department as a civilian supervisor in the youth division. And Jeffrey was one of those people that he just wanted to be loved. He loved people, and he wanted people to accept him. And he went through some hard times. When he was in college, as I said, he was drum major of the college band, and he was in the college choir. Really loved choir, always have loved churches.
And you talk about that throughout the book, that he had a great love for the church choir.
For the church.
When did he find out that he had HIV, I should say?
He was diagnosed on July the 11th in 1989. He was diagnosed with HIV.
And when did you find out?
He called me up on the phone right after he left out of the doctor's office. He called me from a phone booth to say, "Mama, I have just been diagnosed with HIV." And I just started crying. He started crying, and I didn't know what to do. I was at work, and he was somewhere. I guess he had just left the doctor's office. But he came right down to the office right after that, and I looked up at him as he walked through that door, and it just looked like Jeffrey had started dying then. He just looked at me, and he said, "Mama, help me."
Yeah, it takes a psychological toll.
And
as
so
well.
I think it took its toll on him that instant.
What did you know about HIV?
I didn't know anything about it.
So you believed all the myths?
I believed all the myth. I didn't know whether to touch. I didn't know what to do. I was as afraid as he was. He was afraid. I was afraid. But I was even more so afraid because I didn't know what to do to keep from getting HIV myself. You know, I thought I could get it by kissing him or hugging him. So what I did is I started reading. I found every book I could find on HIV, and I found out, and I talked to some doctors about it because I needed to know. You know, I loved my son, and I had to touch him. He was my child. And so I educated myself, which is what we all need to do because the myths are still there.
And I think it's important, too, that people realize that, as I said in my opening, not just the person who has the disease suffers, but the family as well. It takes a toll on them, and it's important that, and this story can be applicable to anyone that has a family member, not just with HIV, but any grave disease. The family needs to become involved because they need to know how to react to one another. They need to know the psychological as well as to be able to relate to the psychological and comfort in the physical ailments that they deal with. But in the beginning stages, you said it was really hard for you all. When did it get to a point where you go through a stage of denial? But when did you come to that point when you were like, okay, this is something that's going to happen, this is inevitable, we have to deal with this?
The only way I got through that point was by Jeffrey. Jeffrey led me through all of this, and he's the one that you would think that I should have been the one, the strong one. It was Jeffrey. He talked about it just like it was, he talked about dying just like he was talking about going to a party. You know, he said, "Mama, you know, this is going to happen, that's going to happen." And I didn't want to hear it, but he forced me to deal with this. And that's just how I had to do it. He helped me to do it.
Now, you talk about that in the beginning, too, because if we can talk about levels, he was way ahead with regards to dealing with this as opposed to, so he had to bring you along, as you say. I think a lot of that, too, attributes to, and it talks about it throughout the book, his strong faith.
Yes, he had very, very strong faith. Jeffrey he's always been a child that always wanted to go to church, work in the church, and as you'll see in the book, he did. He was involved in just everything he could get involved in the church. And he was, as I said before, he was a Q. He was very, very proud of being a Q.
Okay, for those of you who don't know, Omega Psi Phi, he pledged when he was in college, which is
he pledged after he got out of the Army. He pledged when he was grown. He was 31 years old, I think, 30 or 31. But he was quite proud of that, and one of his frat brothers was telling him, he said, "Jeffrey worried him to death about going to church. I want you to go to church." He said, and he just didn't want to go to church. He didn't have any idea. He didn't want any part of any church. And he said it just bothered Jeffrey that he wouldn't go. And Jeffrey was in his wedding. Jeffrey was extremely sick, but he was in his frat brother's wedding. He said, "Well, at least I got you in a church. You went to a church to get married." So, but since that time, this young man has called me and told me, he said, "I need to come over to your house and talk to you." I said, "Sure, anytime," because they still keep up with me. That's what's so wonderful about it. You know, they still remember Jeffrey, and in turn, they remember me. And he came over to my house to tell me that he was graduating from seminary in December. I could not believe it. He said Jeffrey never left him alone. And he said it's just one of the things that happened to him. You know, he said, I never forgot it. And he said, I didn't know how important he was in my life.
Well, so there are two things that come out of that. One, that Jeffrey, even though he had a devastating illness, he didn't let it stop him.
No.
He continued to go on. And as a result of that, he affected a lot of people's lives.
A lot of people's
Affected
lives.
a lot
You
of
know,
people's
people
lives.
told me things that Jeffrey did that people I didn't even know, you know, that Jeffrey was doing things for them. But to show you the kind of person Jeffrey was, when he was in college and they found out that he was homosexual, they asked him to get out of the choir and to get out of the band. And it just, I know it almost killed him. He called me up crying and he said, Mama, they put me out of the choir and they put me out of the band. And I said, why? He never told me. He never told me that he was gay. Jeffrey never looked in my face and said, Mama, I'm gay.
Now, it's interesting, and we're going to kind of get into this before we go into a break, that in my reading, my understanding was that, if I'm correct, that he told his pastor, Jeremiah Wright, and then Pastor Wright sat down and had a discussion with you and told you about his homosexuality.
What was supposed to happen, Reverend Wright knew Jeffrey was gay before Jeffrey even joined the church. He had told Reverend Wright this. He met with him before he joined the church, which I didn't know until I read Reverend Wright's foreword in this book. And he, when he got, he wanted Reverend Wright told him to tell me. He said, talk to your mother.
Okay, we're going to talk more about this. We're going to talk more with Geneva Bell right after this. Stay tuned. We're going to get more into the homosexual aspect when we come back.
When I got your letter, baby, I was in a foxhole on my knees. Oh, yes, I was. And your letter brought me.
Welcome back. I'm Tia Mugabe, and we're talking with Geneva Bell, who is the author of the book My Rose. We're talking about her son Jeffrey, who died in 1992 of AIDS. You had started talking about it in our last segment, but Jeffrey was homosexual, and not only did he have to deal with the issue of the fact that he was dying with AIDS, but he had to deal with the different issues that surround someone who is homosexual.
Right. He, to give you an example, as I was telling you, he was in the choir at college, and in the drum major at the band at college, and they asked him to leave. But to show you what kind of a person Jeffrey was, he did not let this hurt him. Every homecoming, Jeffrey was back for homecoming, and every fundraiser that college choir gave, Jeffrey supported it. He sold raffle tickets, and I just couldn't understand. You know, I was just so angry with him, but he wasn't. He just went right on, and it was his school, and he supported his school.
And I think because he also realized, I always say, whatever choice you make in life, you have to deal with the good and the bad with it. And if that's what he wanted to do, if that's what he wanted to be, then I guess it seemed like he was comfortable with dealing with the good part and the bad part of it. But let's talk about that, because you come from a church background, as a lot of black churches in America. They have a strong belief, biblically based, about homosexuality, the issue of homosexuality. And while some churches will embrace homosexuals, a lot of them, for the most part, do not. How did you and Jeffrey have to deal with the stigma related to that?
Well, it was, I didn't notice so much of a stigma, well, as to his homosexuality while I was at church, because it was just, at Trinity, it's I guess it's a lot of people. They even had cell groups and things for special, you know, group meetings. I didn't know about them because I wasn't involved, but I'm sure that Trinity has dealt with this problem. But most churches do not deal with this problem, and it's a lot of homosexual people in all churches. And it's something that you just have to deal with. But I didn't have that kind of a problem, you know, by him being homosexual. As a matter of fact, I never even talked about it.
But you knew for a long time that he was homosexual.
I knew as his mother. I knew from when I found out what it was. You know, in my generation, that was years ago. I didn't even know, you know, about homosexual people. I heard of them, but I didn't know that I knew any. And if Jeffrey never told me, and he thought after he talked to Reverend Wright, and Reverend Wright advised him to tell me Jeffrey still didn't tell me. He came home and told me Reverend Wright wanted to talk to me. So he thought Reverend Wright wanted. He never told me himself. But I think that it's kind of it's a subject that we talk about at Trinity, and Reverend preaches about it at Trinity.
Okay, and just so that we know, so that people are informed, Reverend Jeremiah Wright is the overseer of Trinity United
Church of Christ.
Church of Christ, located in Chicago. A very large congregation, very powerful speaker. I've had the privilege of going to his one of his church services, and he's a very good speaker. But just so people will know, what is, in a nutshell, if you could, his philosophy on homosexuality?
Reverend Wright teaches us that, well, when I say us, I mean the congregation. He teaches us that we do not have to agree with anything people do. We do not have to agree with homosexuality. We do not have to agree with what they do, their ways in action, but we do have to love them. We have to love them because that's what Christian people are about. We are about love. So we have to let people live their lives, but on the other hand, we have to love them because God said love them. He did not say you can't come to me if you're gay. He didn't say that. He said all of you come. So that includes gay, anything that you have. And I see AIDS today as the leprosy of years ago. We have to have compassion. These are real, honest-to-goodness people. Jeffrey he wanted anything that everybody else wanted. I mean, he was no different. And I don't see homosexuality as being the person. It's a part of their life, but it's not the whole person.
Because Jeffrey was very active.
He was very, very active.
Before we get too far away, I want you to explain, and I think it's beautiful, why you call him my rose.
Okay. Well, Jeffrey and I had always been very, very close, and I guess it had a lot to do with Jeffrey having asthma when he was a child. And we spent so much time in and out of hospitals together, but Jeffrey he started sending me roses. The first money that he got, he started sending me roses, and I guess he was 16, 17 years old. And he sent me roses for every occasion. He never did have to worry about what I was going to get for Mother's Day or what I was going to get for Christmas or my birthday. He sent me roses. And roses was just a special thing between Jeffrey and I. And just to give you an example of how important these roses were to Jeffrey and I, the day after Jeffrey died, I got a dozen roses from Jeffrey. He had asked one of his friends to send my mother roses. And those are the last roses I got from Jeffrey, but he would always be my rose because that's what he was to me.
That's beautiful. That is beautiful. Let's talk about the relationship that you developed with your pastor and how he helped you through this.
Reverend Wright has always, if I can describe him as a kind of person, I always tell him, I said, I really like you because you know my name. We always tease him about knowing people's names in the church, but Reverend Wright has always been, I always call him a visionary because he sees things that you don't even know he's looking. And that's the way I felt about when I was going through all this that I was going through with Jeffrey. I thought he didn't know it because I had promised Jeffrey I would not tell anybody this, and I didn't tell anybody this. When they found it out, Jeffrey told it.
Well, was it that he didn't want them to know about it because he was secretive about him, or was it because he didn't want to deal with, or you to deal with the backlash that could happen?
Well, one thing about Jeffrey was afraid. He was afraid mostly that he was going to lose his job. That's the most thing that he was afraid of. And then he didn't want me to have to deal with the backlash of people knowing, how sick he really was. So I didn't tell anybody. I promised I wouldn't, and I didn't. I didn't even tell Reverend Wright. And so I didn't know Reverend Wright knew, but he went to the hospital and he talked to the chaplain to find out what Jeffrey ate, and he knew it all the time, but I never told him. And he thought that I didn't trust him enough to tell him, but he didn't know at the time about, the secret, I had the promise I had made to Jeffrey. So Reverend Wright has been there. He has been there for me. That's all I can say. I was telling, someone asked me the other night, what did I remember mostly about Jeffrey's funeral? The most I remember Reverend Wright walking off of that altar, coming down there by my son's casket and holding my hand as all the people passed by to offer their condolences. And he stood there holding my hand. And I feel like he's holding my hand right now. He's there for me. If I need Reverend Wright, I know he's there. And which is really saying something about a pastor. Because I know any problem that I have, if I can go to him for advice, or he can try to tell me what to do or tell me what not to do. But I just thank God for leading me to Trinity. As a matter of fact, I went to Trinity with one of my friends who was church hopping. She just wanted to go see about it. She took me there. I joined the church, and I've been there ever since. But he led me there, and he led me there for a purpose, because I just thank God for Reverend Wright. I really do.
Okay, let's jump back. How did your family deal with it? Because it was a long time before you told them, because of the secret.
Because of the secret, right? Well, I didn't tell them. Jeffrey told them. He ended up telling all of them himself. But they had a hard time with me because I was trying, knowing that Jeffrey didn't have long to live, I tried to do everything in the world I could for Jeffrey, financially and otherwise.
And it comes out so well in the book.
And Jeffrey had, had this apartment that he just loved. And if you know anything about gay people, they really are good decorators. They love beautiful things. This was Jeffrey. He was typical. And he loved this apartment. He was living out near O'Hare Field, getting as far away from me, I guess, as he could. And he loved this apartment. This apartment was costing like $1,000 a month. And then when he got sick, I'm trying to pay for this AZT, which is $300 to $400 a month. At that time, it was all new. I'm trying to pay for his medicine. I'm trying to help him pay his rent. And he's working as much as he can, but he was just too sick to work all the time. And then he got so that he couldn't take the L anymore, and I bought him a car. And in the meantime, I was as close to bankruptcy as not having anything to eat, but I was still trying to work every day. I was working. And that's another thing. I think my job was helped up my salvation. It would really,
and
really
now
was.
And now we're talking about coping mechanisms, because I mean, when someone has a grave illness, it's nothing physically or doctorally speaking, I should say, that you could do for them. So you alternate that, or you substitute that for, like you said, paying his rent, even though you were going in debt, buying him a car because he needed it. Because at that point, it's like, well, honey, I can't help you medically, but you know, whatever you need externally, if I can do it, then I'll do it. And was that a way in which you were able to cope?
I think that was a way in which I was able to cope. But on the other hand, his sisters and his brother, and especially his sisters, you know, they thought I was out of my mind. Are you crazy? Why are you doing all this with Jeffrey? They didn't know why I was doing it.
They knew he was sick.
They knew he was sick, but they didn't know what he was sick of. You know, they thought they knew he was off and on sick at first. When he had pneumonia, they thought he had something different, and I just let it go. Well, I really didn't. One sister was here in Chicago, so she knew more than one was in California. But I just never told her, and they just thought I was just going overboard for Jeffrey, and they could not understand why.
Did they get mad at you when Jeffrey told them?
They did, especially my daughters, because they said that wasn't fair for me to take all that on by myself when they were here to help me. But I really didn't care. This was a promise I had made to Jeffrey, and I'd have went to my grave keeping that promise. I'm sorry, I just couldn't care who it hurt.
Because it was a bond you made?
Because that's a bond I made to him.
What about your husband?
My husband, I had been married for 38 years. My husband died like 13 years ago. But as I tell everybody, they think I'm teasing, but I'm absolutely serious.
You talk about it in the book, too.
Because if he had been living while all this was going on, Jeffrey and I both would have been homeless. He would have thrown both of us right out the door, because he did not agree with homosexuality, and I know there is no way he would have let Jeffrey in the house with AIDS. I know that. And so that way, it just shows you how God works things out. You know, he worked it out. He took my husband, you know, so he knew I was going to have this to deal with farther on down the line. Then my father was there. My father was 86 years old.
And he was a handful, too.
He was, you know, I had all through all this, I did laugh sometime. My father was, he and Jeffrey, when Jeffrey came home the last month before he died, he moved back home. And my father was constantly falling all the time. And I couldn't figure out why this man is falling all the time. And I would call my brother and come over, and he would come and see. We'd take Daddy to the doctor. They couldn't find out why Daddy was falling all the time. And Jeffrey would call me at work, Mama, Granddaddy fell again. I can't help him up because I'm too sick. And I'd call my neighbor to go down and see what she could do. And it was after Jeffrey died that I found out why he was my father had a bottle of brandy hidden in the closet. I don't even know how he got it.
Oh.
But he was drinking his brandy, and I guess this is why he was
making him fall. That was making him. Woo.
So, but he was there, and I think the hardest part, they both were vying for my time.
Okay, I was going to ask that
my
too.
My father was, you know.
Okay.
My father had been there 3 years before Jeffrey came back. You know, he had came to live with me 3 years ago after his wife died. Mm-hmm. And so I guess I was his second wife. You know, I was there to fix his food and do anything else he needed done. Mm-hmm. So when Jeffrey came and I couldn't do all that, then that's when it got to be.
That's when he hit the bottom.
That's when he hit the bottom.
Okay.
Yeah.
And then you said that your father unfortunately passed 6 months after.
He passed away 6 months
Jeffrey
after Jeffrey did.
Passed.
He passed in September. Mm-hmm.
You talked about you called neighbors and asked them to come by.
Yeah.
What kind of support did you receive from the people in your community?
I have one real, very good friend that lives 2 doors from me. And we've both been living there since 1957, so we've been there 40-some years. And we've always been there for each other, and she's a retired nurse, and she was always in my corner. You know, I never had any problem. Other neighbors, you know, I really didn't, after they started moving out, then I'm not too close to my other neighbors now, because I guess I'm never there and they're never there, but this one neighbor has we've always been there for each other. And anything that I needed while I was at work, I'd call. I'd go out of town. She sees about my house. She's just been there for me.
Well, they say that you know who your real friends are when you're down. You realize who your real friends are.
And I had this friend named Doris, who I talk about in the book.
Yes, I remember.
And Doris is young. Doris is young enough to be my daughter. But Doris, she never asked any questions, but Doris was there for me. She took me back and forth to work. She went grocery shopping. She cooked. She did everything she could without me ever telling her that what was wrong with Jeffrey. And when he went into the hospital for the last time, and she came by the house, and I said, Doris, I said, you know, Jeffrey has AIDS. She said, I knew it all the time. She said, but I just wanted to give you time to tell it yourself. She said, you know, I knew it.
I want to talk about when we come back from break, when you hit bottom. Okay. And when you realized you hit bottom and how you got out of it, because I believe it's inspiration for anyone. Stay tuned, we'll be right back.
Till you say, I've said enough. I want to stand right by your side when the going gets tough. I want to mend your broken heart till you say, I want to treat you.
We're back. This is Here We Are, and I'm Terry McGarvey, and we're having a very interesting discussion with Geneva Bell, who is the author of the book My Rose, dealing with her son who died of AIDS in 1992, about his homosexual orientation and how they dealt with it. And before we went into break, you talked about the psychological toll that it took on you, the financial toll that it took on you. And I'm sure that when these problems are constantly coming at you, because this was an every day, every minute, second thing you're dealing with until they leave here, when did you get to your lowest point?
Well, I think I got to my lowest point. I started really, really getting low when Jeffrey started asking me to help him commit suicide. That was really, really, I just didn't know what else to do. And I told him, I said, Jeffrey, I can't do this. And he had mood swings, horrendous mood swings. He'd hate me one minute, he'd love me the next minute. And I guess the thing that kind of helped me, he had left my house that Saturday night. We had a big argument. He told me he was tired of me looking at him. He said every time he turned around, I was looking at him, in which I was. I was watching my son die day by day. And I could not help but look at him because I wanted to look at him as long as I could. And he was really upset about it. He told me that I didn't care anything about him. All I wanted to do was make fun of him, you know, like I'm making fun of him. So he left and he went back to his apartment that night. So the next morning, I was getting ready to go to church. I was going to meet him at church, and he was driving in from out near where he lived. And so he called me on the cell phone. He said, Mama, turn the radio on. He told me what station to turn it on. I turned it on, and he had requested a song to me, said, I Feel Like Going On. And I got in my car, and I drove to church, and I cried all the way to church. But anyway, Jeffrey, I just knew, I just felt like I just couldn't take no more. And the thing that kept me going was a scripture that I will live by the rest of my life. It was Isaiah 43, when God said, do not be afraid. because you will go through the storms and you will not drown. You will go through the fire and you will not be burnt, because you are mine and you are precious to me. And I would always remember that. Whenever I would get so low, I just started saying it over and over again. And the last week of Jeffrey's life, he went into the hospital. Jeffrey had everything. He started off with pneumonia, then he had heart trouble, and then he had pneumonia again, and he had carpal sarcoma. He had these dark spots all over his face. And it was just every day it was something different. I had to take him for chemotherapy. I had to do this. So the last week that he went to the hospital, they were giving him chemotherapy. They were doing this, they were doing that. So he went into the hospital on a Tuesday. And then he got so he couldn't keep anything on his stomach. He was just sick. So that Saturday morning, I went to the hospital. His two sisters had spent the night with him. And when I walked in the door, he said, "Mama, I'm so glad to see you." He said, "Because these girls, they have just treated me like they always treat me. They will not give me any water." And I said, "Jeffrey, you can have some water." Then they jumped on me. "He can't have any water because it makes him sick." I said, "Make him sick. He is already sick." So I let Jeffrey have water. He'd drink water and he would get sick. So then he really started talking about his funeral. And he said, "Mama," he said, I've done everything. He said, "I've gotten my program together. Everybody knows what I want." He said, "I've done everything, but I didn't get my casket. I didn't have time to do it before I got sick. But my sisters will do it for you. I don't want you to have to do anything." So he said, "The only thing I want you to do is I got something I want you to say at my funeral." I said, "Are you crazy? How can I talk at your funeral? You know,
now you're still not able to handle this.
I don't want to hear this, you know." And I said, "Jeff, I can't do that." He said, "Mama, you can do it." Okay, just anything to shut him up. I said, "Okay, I'll do it. What you want me to say?" So he started telling me what to say. I said, "Okay." So he looked at me. He said, "Mama, you know you're not going to remember this. You get a pencil and you write this down because I want you to say this." And this was Saturday. This was the last day of his life, and he's telling me this. So I got this pencil and I wrote it down. It's in the book, what he told me to say, and I said it. But he covered up his head, and I said, I took the cover off his head.
And I want to preface this by saying this is the best part of the book. For those who don't have faith, I think this would increase people's faith. Go ahead. I took the cover off his head, and he said, "Oh, Mama, don't do that. Don't touch me." I said, "Why can't I touch you?" He said, "Because I'm getting reconfirmed." I said, "What is that?" And he said, "Mama, you know what that is. You're a deacon. You know what reconfirming is." He said, "So I'm going to do this again. And please don't touch me." And so he covered up his head, and I did not touch him until he uncovered his head. And then he told me, he said, "I want you to call two of my friends." He told me who they were, and I said, "Jeffrey, I don't even know their telephone number." I know the number. He gave me the telephone number. I called. And they were not at home. And about 10 minutes later, they walked into that hospital room. And he told me that he saw his band director, the one from high school, walking across the parking lot. And he says, "And I know everybody that's in this room." And he started naming people in the room. Some were there, but some were not there. And he was naming the people in the room. So he asked me, how was I feeling? I said, "Jeffrey," I said, "I'm really feeling okay." I said, "I'm fine." I said, "How are you?" He said, "I'm okay." So he raised up his arm and he said, "Whose arm is this?" And I said, "That's your arm." He said, "This is not my arm. My arm is not this little." You know, so he said, "Mama," he said, I see this man holding out his hand for me. Should I go with him?" I said, "Jeffrey," I said, "You can go." I said, "If you want to go." So then the doctor came in. They wanted to take him down for another chemotherapy treatment. And he said, "Mama, I'm tired." And I told the doctor, "No, you can't. No more. No more medicine, no more treatments, no more anything." He said he's tired. Then the doctor got all upset with me, thought I was going to sue him. I said, "No," I said, "This is my decision to make." He said he's tired. Leave him alone. And that was the end of them doing anything to him. And then he saw this man again. You didn't see this man?
I never saw this man, and his sister was saying, "Jeffrey, tell me how he looks. Tell me how he looks."
I said, "That would be me.
That's what
he look like? What he got on? What color is he?"
That's exactly what she was doing, and he described this to her. And so he got to be in so much pain then because his kidneys had failed, and he started swelling up, so they gave him a morphine drip. And I was getting ready to, I was standing at the foot of the bed, and he said, Mama, he said, you all right? I said, Jeffrey, I'm fine. And he said, no, you're not fine. Your hair needs combing. And I said, Jeffrey, I said, I love you. He said, I love you too, Mama. And that was it.
And then he went to go with that man.
And then he went to go with that man.
That part of the book, when I read that part, I was in tears.
Yeah.
Because it reaffirms your faith and your belief. Yea, though you walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will be there for you. I'll be there with you. My rod and my staff, they comfort you.
Yes, he did.
And I believe that, which is why, like I said, the book is under 100 pages long, but it says so much, and it ends on such a tremendous note. When Jeffrey went to meet his maker, he was peaceful.
He was peaceful.
He was ready. And you all were too.
Yeah, well, I've always said that if God would just give me the faith that he gave Jeffrey, because he gave Jeffrey some faith. He had the faith, and it was just, but we were all, the nurses at the hospital always said, they said they've never seen a family of an AIDS patient that never left him. Jeffrey was not alone for 1 minute, all while he's in that hospital. We had a schedule, 24/24. We were there for him. And I would even go to the other AIDS patients and give them water and talk to them, because there was nobody there for them.
I think that's another thing that you can draw, that a person can draw from this, that it's important that when a person is going through something like this, that they have the family support in place.
Because it doesn't cost anything. And since that time I've been to hospital, it's just so heartbreaking. The place is empty. All of these people, they have parents. Somehow they got in this world. They have people. But I have just tried to make up my mind that I'm going to be there for them. I have called mothers all over the United States. So if anybody I know and says this mother is going through this, call them. As a matter of fact, just this week, one mother in St. Louis lost her son this week. And I've been talking to her, and I had been talking to her before. But if anything, if this book would just do one thing, it would open up the eyes of the African American community and these churches from the pulpit. We have to talk about AIDS. We have to talk about it. It's killing our people. And we are hiding it, and the longer we hide, the more people it's going to kill.
It is one of the number one killers,
especially in our community,
people, African American people. Do you have any regrets?
I have no regrets at all. The only thing, the last promise that Jeffrey asked me to make that Saturday, they were talking about sending Jeffrey to a nursing home that Monday because they couldn't do anything else for him. And I wanted Jeffrey to come home, and my daughter said, "Oh no, you can't do this anymore. You know, you just don't have the stamina to do it. He'll have to go." I said, "Oh no, I just can't let him go to a nursing home." And so Jeffrey heard us talking about it, and so he said, "Mama, if I have to go, I'll go, but you have to promise me." And when he said that, I said, no more promises. No, I said, I cannot do this anymore, Jeffrey. I just can't do this. And I just prayed. I went home, and I told the Lord, I said, I can't do this. I have done it all. I cannot stand the thought of him going to a nursing home. I just simply cannot do this. And he was supposed to go that Monday, and he died early that Sunday morning, like 2:30 in the morning. So he didn't have to go.
What has come out of this?
The biggest thing I think that makes my heart so glad is the HIV/AIDS ministry at Trinity United Church of Christ. We have a big AIDS ministry there. We have a hotline to any mother, anybody that has a problem, AIDS related, associated. They don't have to look in our face. They can call the hotline. We'll get in touch with them. We have support groups. It's just a tremendous thing, and it's one of the largest AIDS ministry in this city. And Reverend Wright blessed this ministry in December of 1993, and it's just a blessing to my heart. It really is. Because you don't have to hide it. In Trinity, you don't have to hide it. If you got it, you got it. You can say you got it,
How has this affected you?
This has, I tell you one thing, this book itself has just changed my life. I didn't even expect one person to buy this book. I really didn't. I did this book because Reverend Wright said, you need to do this. I did it. I took in a manuscript. Here it is. That I thought was the end of it. But I've gotten so many letters from all across the United States, people that have read this book, that this book has led them to God, and it's just blessing my soul. It really, really has. And I'm still working every day, but I told my boss, I said, you know, I got to take so much time off. I'm doing this and I'm doing that. He said, you can take all the time you need, but you better not quit this job.
Oh, don't quit the job. Okay.
So anyway, I'm still there, but it has changed me. It really, really has. And I'm just thankful to God that he used little me to bring this subject out.
Because you were yielded.
Yeah.
What has happened to, or have you heard anything from the jerks in this book? And one in particular, I'm sorry, I called him a jerk, Jeffrey's roommate. I mean, to think about the things that he did while you were going through this, there was not a help.
And you know, I don't really think that he realized that he was doing all that. I don't know what it was, you know. And I have not seen him since Jeffrey's funeral. I haven't seen him. I have not heard
He did come to the funeral.
He did. He was at the funeral. Yeah,
I'm going to save that story for when you read the book. So this guy was a jerk.
So, but anyway, and then I've had, you know, as I was said, I don't want people to think it was my whole entire church. It was the people I knew and that Jeffrey knew, you know, at church, you know, that got so quiet, you know, that that's the thing, I guess, that hurt, that it made me not want to go to church anymore.
Because you think when you come into the house of the Lord, you're supposed to lay your burdens down, you're supposed to fellowship with one another, you're supposed to share one another's burdens. That's what the word says. But to come into a hostile environment where you're supposed to go to find peace, that must have been really hard for you.
It was awfully hard for me. It was harder for me than it was for Jeffrey, you know, but these were people that I call my friends. You know, I didn't know everybody in Trinity, so it wasn't the whole church. It was people that knew me and knew Jeffrey, and knew Jeffrey would do anything for them, you know, and he is just, I don't know whether they might have been afraid, you know, people at that time, and this was in, you know, in the, 90, it was almost 8 years ago. People didn't know anything as much about AIDS as they do now. They might have been afraid. They were probably right. So I mean, they probably had a reason. They were probably just afraid. But it's just call on the phone. You know, hey, how you doing? You can do that. You don't have to touch them by calling on the phone. You know, and people, it's just I just can't stand the fact of how it's being hidden. It really gets to me.
Is that your charge in life?
That is my charge in life. I said, as long as I'm on this earth, I'm going to be fighting for people to recognize this and recognize the fact that gay people are people just like they are. They want the same thing. And it doesn't cost anything to be compassionate. It doesn't cost anything to say, how you doing? You know, it doesn't cost anything to love people.
You talked about a verse that really helped you through this. When you look back in hindsight, how have you applied that? How are you applying that?
I have applied it because, you know, I'm one of those kind of people that, I guess being an Aquarius, I'm always living in the future, and I'm always figuring out what's going to happen before I get there, and have a fear of it. And so I have to keep repeating this to me, because God said, don't be afraid. You don't have to have any fear. I am with you. And he has proved to me, I'm a testimony to God's word.
You look now and say, I can see how you were with me.
I can see how you were with me.
Even though you were down.
I'm a living testimony that he will do what he said he would do, because he said. And if it was in the storm, I've been through the storms and fires. I know I've been through there. But I didn't realize how much I had been through them until I started taking the words out of the journal, putting them on paper and a manuscript. I could not believe that I had actually gone through all of that and still stood on my feet, and still had so many other responsibilities. I have on my job, I'm the administrator, I'm responsible for a $5 million budget, responsible for seeing that these people get paid every payday, and they did not miss a payday, all while Jeffrey was sick, and I was at home at midnight with that payroll sometimes, taking it back and forth to work.
He sustained you in the midst of the storm.
He sustained me.
You know, Geneva, this is a beautiful story. It was certainly encouraging to me, and I'm sure it'll be encouraging to anyone who reads it. We'll be right back after this. This is Here We Are, and in this edition we're talking to Geneva Bell about the book My Rose, which deals with her life with her son who died of AIDS and what she had to go through. What has this situation taught you about people and human nature?
This has taught me that people, I don't think they really intend to be mean. I think it's mostly ignorance on their part, you know, that they don't know what's happening. I had one pastor say to me that he didn't want his associate pastor's son hanging his coat up next to him because he had AIDS. You know, you can't get AIDS by somebody's coat. But this is the kind of ignorance that's going on in our community. And the only thing that's going to cure this is education. We just have to keep talking about it.
So the hatred was a result of ignorance.
That's what I believe.
That's been the biggest thing.
Right.
The biggest thing that you've had to deal with. And that's what has this whole situation taught you about forgiveness?
It has taught me that you can't forever be angry with people. And since this book has came out, I've had people at my church say, if I did anything to you at that time, please forgive me. I have forgiven everybody. Everybody that I talked about in that book, I have forgiven them because I don't believe that you can live without forgiving. God says forgive, and I really truly believe that you have to forgive.
And just on the psychological...
I haven't forgotten, but I've forgiven.
Oh, you didn't forget. I think on a psychological point, too, that it just takes so much energy to hate someone, to constantly dislike someone. It's much easier to forgive, and I'm a witness of that. How did Jeffrey's sexual orientation affect your family?
You know, I don't really think if it affected the family that much. I don't really know whether it did or not because nobody never seemed to talk about it. You know, I was uncomfortable talking to anybody about it, so I never talked to anyone about it, and I was worried about how people would treat him, especially as I talk about in the book. I talk about one nephew in that book that called Jeffrey up on the phone and told him how he was going. And this is about a week before Jeffrey died. Told him he was going to hell and this and that and all this stuff, you know. Because I don't think we're put here to judge people.
He was telling Jeffrey
this? He was telling Jeffrey
So how did Jeffrey take that?
And it really hurt him. You know, I mean, he said, Mama, this is never ever going to be over. I said, oh, it'll be over one day. And it's over now. You know, he can't be hurt anymore. But it's just the idea of people not having compassion. You don't put yourself where they are. You know, you wouldn't want anybody to hurt you. And it's not an easy life. I've talked to... we had our HIV/AIDS retreat about 2 or 3 weeks ago. And we were talking to some of the homosexual young men, and they were telling their life story, the things that they have gone through. And I think I cried more that day than I've cried in a long time because it's just so hurtful. Because they're human beings. They have hurts. People hurt them. And they don't bother anybody. That's the thing that gets me. People hurt them and they don't do anything to them.
That's a big component to it because regardless of what our opinions on homosexuality is, that's not the biggest component to a person's life. It's evidenced by all the things that you said Jeffrey was involved in. But as a result of him being this way, of making this lifestyle, of choosing this lifestyle, he had to deal with all these ramifications of it. But it still didn't take away from the fact that he was very active in the military. He served his country. That he was smart. He did well in school. He obtained a, did you say MBA? That he was very active in his social activities. He was a part of a fraternity that he was very proud of, very active in the church. And when I mean that, he was on a lot of different auxiliaries of the church. I mean, him being homosexual was just one component of it. And I think that is because a microscope is put to that. People think that was the end-all, be-all of the person. No, this was just one component.
I'll have people say, you know, so-and-so, he's a homosexual. But they don't come and tell me so-and-so, he beats his wife or he goes out on his wife. They put adjectives on their name when they talk about gay people. But why? They are no different from anybody else. And if you really get to know them, they are some of the smartest people that God has put on this earth. And I guess he gave them that. Because I don't know, I have never met a dumb one. They all have brains, you know. They are all brainy people. And as a matter of fact, I've seen one young man died of AIDS, was was a double doctor. He was a pediatrician and an MD. And this disease is stealing our finest, our smartest, our best, and now it's stealing our women, our children. It's all over our community.
When you talk to, because as I understand you talk to different family members that deal with this, what is the one piece of advice that you give to all of them that you feel is important for them to know?
I tell them to talk about it, and I really have a problem with some mothers. They still don't want people to know that their child died of AIDS. And they think people really don't know. But people know. They know what they died of, and they will not. We have, on World AIDS Day, which is December the 1st, we have a full day at Trinity. We usually have a conference. If it's the first falls on a Sunday, we'll have it the Saturday before, but we have an all-day conference, and then we end up that night with a service. A memorial service. And we ask people, you know, we have a list out in the narthex. We ask people, if you know anybody that died of AIDS, any relative, write the name down. And during this service, we call every one of those names and light a candle for every one of those people. And our church is full, so you can imagine, this is one church. Can you imagine all over the United States the many people that have died of AIDS? But some mothers will not allow us to put their children's name on this list. And they're dead and gone, but
they're still in denial. They're still in denial. Even though I wouldn't wish this, what you went through, on anyone, do you think that you would be the same person, Geneva Bell, sitting here talking to me now, if you had not gone through what you went through?
I know I would not. And I, as a matter of fact, when Jeffrey first got sick, I was so angry with God. I couldn't believe God was doing this. I just couldn't believe it. I was angry with that man. I told him, I said, I don't understand this. I said, Jeffrey is only 33 years old. I was 63 at the time. And he was taking Jeffrey. And Jeffrey was right where Jeffrey wanted to be. He had his education, he had his good job, he was right where Jeffrey wanted to be.
Life was about to start.
Life was about to start for him. And I said, God, I just don't understand. Why are you going to take my child at 33 years old, and here I am 63? I've lived my life. Take me, you know. But I found out you don't bargain with God, and I couldn't find out why God left me here. But I think I know. I think I know now that he left me here to be right where I am right now.
What you're doing. We don't have much time left, but if I could ask you briefly to tell us, what do you feel is a family's responsibility to a person with a grave illness? And then, in fact, what do you feel is that person's responsibility to their family?
I think that, that the personal responsibility to the person that's gravely ill is make them as comfortable as possible. Be compassionate and love them. That's the only thing you can give them. You can't cure them, but you can love them. And to the person that's, a lot of people that have AIDS, they don't tell their family. You know, they keep it a secret too. And we're just going to have to just trust our families enough to go to them when we're in need.
In one word, communication.
And communication.
Ms. Bell, I want to thank you for coming to the program and sharing your testimony. It was certainly an encouragement to me, and I'm sure it's an encouragement to anyone who reads the book. The book is called My Rose. It's by Geneva Bell. I would encourage you all to go out and read it. Please read this book. It will change your life. Thank you for coming to the program.
And thank you for inviting me.
We'll be right back after this. Welcome back. Here's a commentary by Billy Montgomery.
Hi, my name is Billy Montgomery with a moment of reflection. Recently, I was involved in a high school workshop where two strange things occurred. One group of students could not read. This group stumbled and fumbled over simple words that should have been learned in elementary school. The other group could not remember what it read. When asked to recall passages, this group simply could not do it. Then I began to wonder, what does it say about a society when one group can't read and another one cannot comprehend? Growing up, I remember a national campaign called Reading is Fundamental. A van would come through our neighborhood, we would get books off of it and take them home to read. I think we need another campaign to stress reading. When students can read, they can do math, science, and exercise critical thinking. When students can read, they can fill out job and college applications. When students can read, they become messengers to society instead of ministers to society. Each church, community, and civic group should launch a grassroots reading campaign. In order to have future leaders, we must first have present readers. Thank you.
And thank you, Billy. I want to thank all of my guests who came out today, Miss Geneva Bell and her book, Rose. You know, if you have any questions or comments about Here We Are, please give us a call to let us know how we're doing. The phone number is 773-881-3606. On behalf of all of us at Here We Are, thank you for tuning in. Until next time, as always, God bless.